Hello and welcome back to LPRs Delivery. Today's lesson will take a break from the aircraft for technical problems and we'll move on to back at looking a little bit of grammar and vocabulary for plain English that you can use in the exam. One question that we might ask is, how does severe weather impact your job? Something that controllers, especially in Thailand, often say is, bad weather affects my job a lot. So the problem here is we cannot say affect to my job. So for today's lesson, we'll look at the difference between affect and affect. And we talk about how to use them in a sentence. First of all, the main thing to remember is that affect with an A is a verb. And affect with an E is a noun, which means we're going to use them differently in sentences because the grammar is different. To get started, let's look at affect, the verb which starts with an A. A way that you can remember this is that A is for action, A, action, affect. And verbs are usually actions, so that's how you can remember. Now, let's go to our Learner's Dictionary online, and let's explore the word affect. So here we are at our Oxford Learner's Dictionary, and we'll search affect. Here we can see affect is a verb, and here's the pronunciation.
Affect.
Affect.
So here we see British and American English is about the same. Now, we see affect somebody or affect something means to produce a change in somebody or in something. Let's look at the examples. How will these changes affect us? Notice that we do not say, how do these changes affect to us? Right? So we don't use to with affect as a verb. Also, your opinion will not affect my decision. Affect something, affect someone. Here, like we see, it's often passive voice. The south of the country was worst affected by the drought. So here you can see we've got verb to be with affected, which is the past participle or verb sam. So here we could say the drought affected the south of the country, or passive voice, the south of the country was worse affected by the drought. Now remember, when we use these learners' dictionaries, they have lots of useful tools, things like collocations. Here we can see dramatically is an adverb that often goes with affect. Dramatically affect, greatly affect, materially affect. Also a very common one is adversely. So adversely affect means in a negative way. So let's go back to look at some examples about how we can use the verb affect in an aviation sense. VIP flights affect my job. Bad weather affects my job. Notice here the difference because flights is plural, so we need the plural noun in present simple. Weather is uncountable, and so therefore singular, so we need that third person singular s. Affects my job. Bad weather dramatically affects my job. So remember from our previous lesson about adjectives and adverbs that adverbs usually either go before the action or can also be at the end of the sentence or after the clause. Bad weather affects my job dramatically. Remember that we don't usually put adverbs between the verb and the object. So we shouldn't say affects dramatically my job. Either dramatically affects my job or affects my job dramatically. Bad weather can affect my job. In this case, can is just the modal verb, so we need the base verb affect. Notice we can also make affect negative. Snow doesn't affect operations in Bangkok. Or airline mergers don't affect my job. So remember to change the correct auxiliary verb depending on the tense and the number. So, snow is singular and uncountable, so snow doesn't affect. Mergers is plural, so therefore mergers don't affect. We could also use any tense, of course. Didn't affect, won't affect, hasn't affected. So we can use this in any tense. So we've seen how to use the verb affect. Now let's look at the noun affect or effect. Again, let's go back to our learner's dictionary. So here, if we search for the word effect, here we see the first word brought up is the noun effect. Notice here this dictionary writes the pronunciation a little bit different.
Effect.
Effect.
So that's slightly different than it recommends the other one. If you'll remember when we talked about the verb affect, previously they wrote the first sound here as the schwa, as the effect. Here they're recommending the effect. So it's very, very similar, but actually in a lot of dialects, we often just say exactly the same. Affect, affect. Now, let's look at some examples. We see that affect can be countable or uncountable. So we can use both styles. And notice we see effect on somebody or effect on something. So the meaning is basically the same. The effect of heat on metal, dramatic effects, long-term effects, some useful collocations here. Here we see an example with have. Modern farming methods can have an adverse effect on the environment. So notice here we've got the verb have, which is very common, effect on something. That's our common form for using the noun effect. So here if we look at some collocations, we see a decisive effect, a dramatic effect, a far-reaching effect. And here we see some other verbs. Of course, have an effect on something, exert an effect on something, bring about an effect on something. And here we see these phrases also. And let's look at some similar examples in the field of aviation. Before we said as the verb that VIP flights affect my job. Now if we change this to the noun, VIP flights affect my job, we notice here now there's no verb, right? So we have noun and noun and noun, which we can't use in English. So we have to use the verb have. VIP flights have an effect on my job. Next, bad weather affects my job. So if we change it to the noun, again we need a verb. Bad weather has an effect on my job. Again, plural, plural, singular, singular. Before we said bad weather dramatically affects my job. Now if we want to change to the noun, how about this? Bad weather has a dramatically effect on my job. No, we can't do this, right? Because here we've got adverb before a noun, which we don't do that. So we need the adjective. Bad weather has a dramatic effect on my job. Next, bad weather can affect my job. Change it to the noun, and here we can't use the modal verb with the noun, so we still need the other verb. Bad weather can have an effect on my job. Next, snow doesn't affect operations in Bangkok. We want to change to a noun, then we need to change the grammar. Snow doesn't have an effect on operations in Bangkok. Likewise, airline mergers don't affect my job. Airline mergers don't have an effect on my job. Now, one thing we notice here is we see an effect, a dramatic effect. This means that in all of these cases, we're referring to effect in a countable way, which is the most common way to talk about effect. But as you know, if we talk about countable nouns, in general, we don't always have to be singular. VIP flights can have more than one effect on your job. For example, it might cause delays, it might cause frustration, it might cause you excitement because you get to see some celebrities. So these are many different effects that are possible. But if we do that, notice that we take out the article. Now, keep in mind that when things are negative and plural, we often use the word any. Right? Snow doesn't have any effects on operations. Likewise, sometimes we might use some. VIP flights have some effects on my job. Now, we've talked about how effect with an A is usually a verb and how to use that in a sentence. We've talked about effect with an E as a noun and how to use that in a sentence. And if you can master this, that's really good enough. That will be enough grammar and vocabulary for you to really show off and do well on the exam and get level 4, maybe even level 5 or 6. However, as you know, English is full of exceptions. Whenever we make a rule, we often break it. So I'll introduce you to the most common exception about these, and that's when we use the word effect with an E as a verb. It's related but has actually a totally different meaning. So let's investigate. Let's look up effect as a verb in our Learner's Dictionary. And let's search effect. Okay. When we search effect, we see the first thing that comes up is the noun, which, as we said, that's the most common usage of this word. However, if we scroll down past all of this, here we go. Here we see effect as a verb. Let's click on that. And here we say effect as a verb.
Effect. Effect.
And the pronunciation is the same as before. But now, here's where it's important, because the meaning is different and the register is different. To effect something is a formal phrase which means to make something happen. So some common collocations are to effect a cure, or to effect a change, or to effect a recovery. The most common is to effect a change. So when we say effect a change, it means to make a change happen, or to bring about a change. And again, we only really use this in a formal sense. So let's look at some examples. The negotiators hope to effect a smooth transition. Or these drugs can sometimes effect miraculous cures. So again, that means to bring about a transition, which is a change. Or to bring about a cure, to make a cure happen. So let's look at this in an aviation sense. Here, verb is effect. We see Aerotie hopes to effect a significant change in ATC capacity and efficiency through the implementation of TMCS. Here we see this sentence is quite long and uses lots of long words. So that means it's a more formal situation. So here we can see the verb phrase hopes to effect, hopes to do something, hopes to bring about a significant change, hopes to make a significant change happen. So that's why we're using the verb effect here. Notice if we change this to an A, right, Aerotie hopes to effect a change, it doesn't really make sense anymore because effect means change. So we don't want to change a change. It's kind of redundant and doesn't really make sense. We really want to bring about a change or make the change happen. If we want to use the word effect with an A, we would need to change the structure of the sentence. For example, we might say, Aerotie hopes to affect ATC capacity and efficiency through the implementation of TMCS. So here, affect means change, so we're changing the capacity, right? We're changing the efficiency, not changing the change. Or even more likely, we might simply say, TMCS will affect ATC capacity and efficiency, because really it's the system that affects the efficiency, not so much about the management or the company affecting the capacity. It's the technology that really affects capacity. So let's look back at affect and effect again, the base words. And I want to also talk about the word impact or impact. That these words really mean the exact same thing, or almost the exact same thing as affect and effect. And we use them almost exactly the same way. So for example, with the verb affect, if we see our examples from before, if we want to change to the verb impact or impact, that we could see we could change, everything stays exactly the same. Right? VIP flights impact my job. Bad weather impacts my job. Everything is all the same with the grammar. Likewise, the noun effect is basically the same, especially structural-wise, as impact, the noun. So here we see have an effect on, has an effect on. We can also say VIP flights have an impact on. Bad weather has an impact on. So the grammar and the structure is exactly the same, even with the prepositional collocation. So here we go again. How does severe weather impact your job? Bad weather affect to my job? No. Shouldn't do that. So think about all these different words that you've learned today, and maybe pause the video and try to say this sentence in a few different ways before you take the quiz. So I know this has been a rather long lesson just to really master 2 words, but I hope it's been helpful in that, 1, you can learn how to research words on your own using learners' dictionaries, which can really improve your grammar as well as your vocabulary. Also, by learning to use these words really well, you can also improve your grammar in other sections and using other vocabulary. So please go online and take the quiz for this lesson. And then also, after you finish the quiz, which you can check yourself, there will be a practice assignment where you can go on and you can type some sentences, type some answers related to these words, and I'll give you all feedback one-on-one. And you can also see each other's ideas and see each other's feedback on the shared Google Doc that's in the Google Classroom. So that's it for this lesson, and we'll see you next time on LPR's Delivery. ขอบคุณครับ สวัสดีครับ